Welcome everybody. So I am back in bringing you guys a brand new movie review, and this is going to be for the 2007 Ghostrider, starring Nicolas Cage as well as Eva Mendes and Sam Elliott. This is also directed by Mark Steven Johnson and is one of my favorite films. Pretty much before the whole Marvel Cinematic Universe thing kind of took off, this movie sees a young Johnny Blaze. He is pretty much working with his dad Barton Blaze at the stunt show, and eventually find out that Barton Blaze has cancer. Barton Blaze being an extremely talented and famous individual in his own right, and then eventually you see that Mephistopheles, played by Peter Fonda, shows up and offers Johnny Blaze a deal to kind of save his father in exchange for him pretty much riding with him as his Ghostrider. Johnny Blaze asks when, he's going to become the Ghostrider, and he pretty much says whenever he needs him, and the fact that, he should probably think about cutting all ties with his family and friends, especially Roxanne Simpson, who's pretty much his only true love within this film. She is the person that is pretty much his rock and who he's trying to kind of become his future wife and stuff like that throughout this film. This is someone that Johnny Blaze as a young kid sees as, pretty much spending the rest of his life with. And there's a scene where they kind of go to this hillside, and it's an expanse of mountains and stuff, and it's covered in trees and things like that, and they carve pretty much together forever in the tree stump. And it's kind of cool to kind of see this kind of scene because it shows sort of the bonding moment between Roxanne and Simpson before everything kind of goes to shit between them. And this is one of the things that bothers me in movies, is when they kind of say that this movie is taking place in Texas, but they've actually shot it elsewhere in sort of Australia. They did the same thing with Contagion, where they kind of said that they were set in sort of Minnesota, but they actually filmed in a different state entirely, which would have been kind of cool for them to kind of film in Minnesota, just because of the fact that, it started Mark Wahlberg and it was a really good story and everything. But I understand that due to sort of the tax breaks and stuff like that, they had to kind of film elsewhere, and that's kind of the case with Ghostrider, where they kind of didn't get that good of tax breaks, so they kind of had to move from shooting in Texas to Australia, which I think looks almost as identical as sort of Texas would look if you actually went there in person. But I digress. This movie is really good in terms of the story department. It's pretty much a will they, won't they mixed in with sort of a superhero film, so there is a little bit of a romance in there for pretty much the adults, and especially being the fact that this is starring Eva Mendes, who I think is a really talented actress. She has actually been, one of my celebrity crushes when I was a kid and stuff like that, and still I think she's actually pretty attractive and good looking. But this movie then sees, the stunt show accident. Barton Blaze and Johnny Blaze do the stunt show, and Barton Blaze kind of collapses after kind of landing the jump. Peter Fonda's character Mephistopheles comes back, and you kind of see young Johnny Blaze kind of question why he didn't save his father, why he kind of made that deal with the fact that, he would save his father's life but would not keep him alive through the whole stunt show and stuff like that. And this kind of leaves Johnny Blaze kind of distraught and everything. His father really meant a lot to him, as I'm sure a lot of young boys' fathers would in that scenario. And so, Johnny Blaze goes to meet Roxanne Simpson near the Together Forever tree, and he kind of rides off in the sunset, pretty much with rain and kind of stuff barreling down upon him. Really kind of sad sequence, because you kind of see the bond between them that they had kind of split apart. And cut to the modern day. Roxanne Simpson is now a television reporter and working for a news corporation. You've got Johnny Blaze, who is played by Nicolas Cage, and he's working sort of again as sort of a daredevil extraordinary. He's almost as famous as his father Barton Blaze by now, and he is also the Ghostrider, which there's a lot of sequences in this movie that kind of show, how he's able to kind of survive these death-defying stunts even when he has accidents. And whoever they got to play Mac, who is pretty much Johnny Blaze's best friend, is, really cool in this movie. He is pretty much the comic relief character. He's always kind of there to kind of take care of Johnny Blaze and kind of warn him and keep him safe, to try and maybe talk him out of doing some sort of situation that he's about to go through. And one of those situations is this sort of leap of death, or something like that as it's called within this movie. It's pretty much a gigantic football stadium with, helicopters, Black Hawk helicopters, and then you got pyrotechnics that kind of explode into the air as Johnny Blaze is actually flying over them. You get this sequence where Roxanne Simpson has to go and interview Johnny Blaze before this kind of stunt show thing, and she's also kind of trying to warn him not to kind of take this kind of stunt, even though they've kind of, gone their separate ways within their relationship, and Johnny Blaze is still kind of hitting on her, trying to get her back and win her heart again. There's some pretty funny sequences that happen in this movie, a lot of really cool one-liners and stuff, and a lot of really cool action sequences, which we'll discuss later on in the review. Johnny Blaze actually makes it over sort of the stunt, and the giant explosions are pretty cool. You got that sort of Crazy Train song by Ozzy Osbourne that comes in during the sequences, and whoever picked out the music has really good taste in music, because there's a lot of really cool rock and roll beats and stuff that happen through this movie. And I think that's one of the reasons why I really do like this movie, just because there's so many songs that I still listen to this day that are on the soundtrack of this film. Johnny Blaze goes after to try and set up a date with Roxanne. She's pretty much on the freeway, and Johnny Blaze actually catches up with her and catches up with the cinematographer that, she is kind of with. He is trying to flirt with her to try and get her back, and eventually they kind of set up a date. This leads to Johnny Blaze kind of bouncing on that date and kind of skipping it when Mephistopheles comes that night and pretty much has him do his first run as the Ghostrider. Rebel Wilson is even in this movie, and she plays this girl that's getting mugged. And this is the first time that I've ever seen, Rebel Wilson in the movie. I was sitting in the theater with one of my friends, and I'd never seen her before in a film, so I didn't really have any judgments on her. Now she pretty much just plays the stereotypical fat girl that kind of falls down and makes fun of herself throughout every movie, which I honestly don't like. You can interchange her character with Melissa McCarthy's character, and pretty much nothing would, change with these two actresses. And so he does the whole pen and stare trick, and you kind of see the first transformation sequence between Johnny Blaze and the Ghostrider, where he kind of becomes the Ghostrider, and he has this leather jacket that has kind of spikes that come out, and he's got, these chains that kind of turn into flames and stuff, and then, he's got a flaming skull for a head, which some of these transformation sequences are pretty brutal, even for a PG-13 movie. And, there's a big giant fight sequence that takes place during the first transformation sequence as well, whereas you see sort of these four sort of demons that come into play, and one of them is played by Wes Bentley, and he's playing Blackheart, which is this demonic sort of almost Antichrist-like character. And, Johnny Blaze pretty much takes him out within this film. And there's a chase sequence that happens when they're kind of hunting him down, and he kind of goes through the city of, Australia, which is doubling for Texas, and he kind of rides up the side of a building, and even Roxanne Simpson even kind of sees him riding up the side of the skyscraper at one point in time in the film. And there's a police helicopter that kind of chases after him, and he kind of, swings the kind of helicopter away from him while fighting some of these demonic creatures. And then that's when you kind of see the first scene where Sam Elliott appears as sort of the caretaker, or Carter Slade. Carter Slade has sort of moments with Johnny Blaze where he's kind of telling him about sort of the history of the Ghostrider. Ghostrider, aka Nicolas Cage in this movie, is constantly trying to figure out who this guy is, and he eventually learns throughout the ending of the film that he's actually one of the previous Ghostriders that has pretty much been throughout the history of the Ghostrider war and stuff like that. And you kind of learn that Wes Bentley's character is after the deed of San Venganza, as well as Mephistopheles. He wants to get it because if he does, he kind of harness the power of all these demons and pretty much take over the world. So it's kind of a race against time sort of thing later on towards the film. And one of the cool moments of this film is you see Ghostrider after the first sort of chase sequence where he's kind of running off the skyscraper of the building. He's drinking like pints and pints of water, and it's just kind of a hilarious sequence. Like, there's a lot of really good comedy in this film as well, and some of the jokes really do land. This is before sort of the whole Marvel sort of cinematic universe type of humor. There's even a sequence where Johnny Blaze actually ends up in a prison, and a bunch of guys are trying to, beat the shit out of him and stuff like that, and kind of coax the Ghostrider out of him. And he eventually, transforms and just explodes like a ball of fire and kind of knocks him backwards and stuff. And there's this kid that he kind of saves within the prison, and he kind of melts his way out of sort of the metal beams and stuff within the prison cell, and kind of escapes and stuff. And that leads to eventually Roxanne Simpson, as well as the police, kind of figuring out who Johnny Blaze actually is and the Ghostrider, which Carter Slade pretty much warns to kind of keep a low profile, that he feels that you should probably cut ties with this woman because, she's pretty much in danger if indeed, in fact, he has a relationship with her. And at one point in time, this movie is kind of worried about Johnny Blaze just because of the fact that he's reading these sort of old books about, demons and stuff like that, and Christianity and stuff. And he even tells at one point he's been, reading these crazy books and stuff like that, and he's really worried about him. And that's when Wes Bentley sort of attacks not only Mac and kills him, but also Roxanne Simpson. He turns her pale and stuff, and she's stiff, and Ghostrider eventually finds her and tries to stop this, which eventually he does, and takes out several of the other demons and stuff in a really cool fashion. There's a really awesome scene before sort of the sequence where they go to the San Venganza or whatever the place is in this film. You see Carter Slade kind of agree to work with Johnny Blaze in this film, and eventually he has like one last ride before he pretty much just, like Luke Skywalker or Ben Kenobi, pretty much just dissipates into the ether. And you see that really cool sequence where, Johnny Blaze and Carter Slade are kind of riding along on the horseback, and Johnny Blaze is kind of riding on this motorcycle, and you see the trail of flames and stuff. That was one of the really cool moments in this film. And then once they finally get to San Venganza, he pretty much tells him that, this is as far as I go. I can't really help you any further from this. And you get that really cool sequence where Johnny Blaze's hell cycle is riding across water and stuff like that. And then the demons kind of attack him and knock him off the motorcycle, and Johnny Blaze still gets the better of them. Anyway, he eventually meets up with Roxanne Simpson, who's being held in captivity by Wes Bentley, who is pretty much the Satan or Antichrist character within this film. And like I said before, he's hell-bent on taking over the world, and he's really jealous of Johnny Blaze because Peter Fonda's character actually really likes Johnny Blaze a lot more than Wes Bentley's character. So you got that brother sort of squabbling that takes place throughout this film as well. And the fact that they're both kind of demons from hell. And Johnny Blaze throughout this movie is kind of like, I made a deal with the devil. Should I be pretty much punished for this for the rest of my life? Which eventually tells one of the main characters in the film. And I think this is a really cool sort of moment for Johnny Blaze because it's kind of showing that he's kind of turning from sort of a demonic figure to actually becoming the good guy, sort of an anti-hero within this film franchise. And by the end of this film, he's pretty much destroyed Wes Bentley's character, who pretty much takes the deed of San Venganza in exchange for Roxanne Simpson. And, Roxanne Simpson now understands who Johnny Blaze is and the fact that he's actually a Ghostrider. And then all the times before when he's kind of bailed on her dates and stuff like that, he's actually been working for the devil. It's kind of a weird thing that, she'd be attracted to him for that, but I guess because he's a superhero, that would be the case. But eventually he destroys Wes Bentley's character and does the penance stare on him after Wes Bentley's like, your powers don't really work on me, but eventually does. He also uses this shotgun, which turns into sort of a demonic shotgun, kills Wes Bentley's character. You see Peter Fonda's character return, and he's pretty much like, you're my writer, and it's like, I'm going to own this curse, and that from now on I'm pretty much doing my own thing, which eventually pisses Peter Fonda's character off. And you see kind of Mephistopheles just disappear like Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars franchise into the ether and stuff like that, and that's pretty much the end of the film. Due to the fact that this movie is sort of one of the older sort of Marvel films before the MCU and stuff like that, I think this movie was really, really well made. I know a lot of people at the time didn't really like this film, but I think this movie has aged pretty darn well, especially with the visual effects and stuff, with like the Ghostrider transformation sequences, as well as the sort of Ghostrider Hell Cycle transformation sequences. Originally, they wanted to do sort of a American Chopper or an Orange County Chopper's sort of bike for that Hell Cycle, but they actually couldn't do that just because of the fact that it would cost too much money and they didn't have the funds for that. So they used it to kind of perfect the story and stuff like that, which I really do think was a good idea. The fact that it was kind of before CGI was heavily used and they had to kind of use practical visual effects and CGI sparingly. That's one of the things that I really do appreciate within this film. And the fact that the musical score is really great, using a lot of rock and roll music and stuff like that before the whole pop and techno thing kind of became really popular to use in films and stuff. And the story is just a really good sort of hero's journey of Johnny Blaze trying to reconcile with his family, to try and save his family, but every time he does, the people in his life pretty much get torn from him. And I think that really does make it seem like it's a movie that does really hold up to this day, because you could really identify with the character and kind of the struggles that he has to go with, along with pretty much selling himself to the devil and eventually kind of breaking free from that and actually going back to sort of the light side of the force, as I would kind of say in this kind of situation. Even the transformation sequences are pretty fantastic, and some of the fight sequences that take place and the one-liners that Ghostrider pretty much says throughout most of this movie are really fantastic. So I'd have to give this movie about an A+. I think that this movie really definitely does deserve an A+, and if you get the chance, do watch this. Sam Elliott does a really good job in this movie, as he always does. He pretty much gives his A game as sort of the caretaker and someone that's really looking out for Johnny Blaze's own well-being while he's the Ghostrider. You get the feeling that, he's playing sort of the surrogate father figure of this character, because, Johnny Blaze has never had a father, he's had a father figure, but he was killed by Mephistopheles in this movie. But, you get the feeling that he's really, he cares about him a lot and stuff like that, and that's kind of why it's heartbreaking towards the end of the film, where you kind of see, sort of like in the Star Wars franchise, you losing the mentor figure within this film, as well as him kind of losing the love of his life, which is Roxanne Simpson in this film. And Eva Mendes even does a really great job playing this character, which, I've always had sort of a celebrity crush on Eva Mendes and stuff like that, and I think she does great in all the movies that she's in as well. So with the cast, with the, the visual effects and sort of the action sequence of this movie, with the one-liners, with the score of this movie, I think that this movie definitely deserves that A+ rating. I think that people who are interested in Marvel movies before the whole superhero film thing kind of took hold, definitely give this film a chance. And I really did enjoy watching this movie in the theaters when I was a kid, and had a really good time, watching it on DVD, and eventually, PSP days where I had a PSP and I had the UMD version of that on PSP, and I'd watch that on vacations and stuff. Like, it's just a really good time. I really did enjoy this movie, so hats off to the cast and crew. And as always, guys, hopefully you guys learned a thing or two about the movie industry, and as always, guys, rate, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.